Kirby Air Ride is a very unique game with a very unique development story that started almost a decade before it finally released for the GameCube in 2003, with 8 years of development history spanning multiple tech demos under different names. The amount of unused stuff in this game is on another level, thanks to the most in-depth debug mode that I have ever seen in any video game that I have covered on this channel. So without further ado, let's get on board and take a ride with Kirby Air Ride.
But first, a word from our sponsor, FlexiSpot. Tired of your old office chair? Is it worn out or just downright uncomfortable? Introducing the FlexiSpot C7 Max, the premium ergonomic office chair that can be customized to fit your specific sitting needs. While other chairs can only move up and down, the C7 Max allows you to adjust the entire backrest. It also has an easy-to-adjust headrest and 5D armrests. Amazing! The secret is the FlexiSpot multi-zone back design that supports your head, neck, spine, back, and even your legs and feet. Now it's comfortable and fun to get work done. So why settle for other chairs that strain your back and are just all around uncomfortable when you can get the FlexiSpot C7 Max? With adaptive lumbar support, a 135-degree adjustable backrest, and a convenient footrest, it's easy to switch from work to play any day. Order right now with promo code C730 to get $30 off your FlexiSpot C7 Max. And be sure to click the link in the description to check out FlexiSpot's Black Friday deals, up to 60% off site-wide. Here's how to order. To order the FlexiSpot C7 Max office chair with unparalleled customization, go to flexispot.com or click the link in the description. And now back to the development of Kirby Air Ride. Before getting to Kirby Air Ride on the GameCube, we first have to go almost a decade back to 1994. On September 21st of that year, Kirby's Dream Course was released in Japan. It's a Kirby golf game for the SNES, or it's kinda like golf. You basically whack Kirby around a course towards a hole while defeating enemies and getting copy abilities, which come in very handy in multiplayer. 2 players head-to-head fighting for the championship with all the bragging rights that entails. Kirby's Dream Course was like the Super Bowl of Kirby games. And I say that because the game is actually called Kirby Bowl in Japan. Maybe as a reference to American football, or maybe because the courses are actually shaped like bowls sometimes. The cool thing about this game is that even though it uses 2D graphics, it is technically the first Kirby game to feature 3D gameplay and physics. But what was the first Kirby game that was actually in 3D? You'd think it was Kirby 64, but no. Actually, the first Kirby game in 3D was Kirby Bowl 64. Never heard of it? Well, that's because it was never actually released. Kirby Bowl 64 was a playable tech demo shown at Shoshinkai 1995, a private event that was set up by Nintendo for distributors, developers, publishers, and the press to attend. There, Nintendo would introduce new products like Kirby Bowl 64. Shoshinkai 1995 happened on November 24th, and immediately following that on November 25th and 26th, Nintendo held a public event that anyone was able to attend, known as Famicom Space World, or just Space World for short. At these events, Nintendo showed off the final design of the Nintendo 64 with a big reveal showcasing 13 upcoming games, including Super Mario Kart R, later known as Mario Kart 64. But there was a catch. Only 2 of them were playable. The other 11 games were only shown on looping VHS tapes. Originally, there were going to be 12 playable demos, but days before the event, Yamauchi, president of Nintendo at the time, pulled 10 of the demos, leaving only Mario 64 and Kirby Bowl 64 playable at Shoshinkai and Space World. And thanks to Space World being a public event, we actually can see what this demo had in store. But not much of it. We actually have barely even a minute of footage to watch, and that's because taking videos of TV screens was prohibited, but people did it anyway. So let's see what we got of Kirby Bowl 64.
So those of you in the know about Kirby Bowl 64 might be wondering how I am so confident in the name. After all, a lot of news outlets reported that it was called Kirby Ball 64. And you'll still see plenty of places on the internet that call it by this alternate title. So why is that? Well, the reason for the confusion is that the game's katakana is kabi, Beta64. Sounds both like bowl and ball. But thanks to the Shoshinkai footage that we have, we can see the official translation for the game is Kirby Bowl 64. In fact, we can also see that it was just a temporary name for the game.
Now, as I said earlier in the video, the Japanese name of Kirby's Dream Course is Kabiboru, spelled in the exact same katakana as Kirby Bowl 64. So the general consensus is that this Nintendo 64 tech demo was a planned sequel to the SNES game. And it's not just the name. Kirby Bowl 64 shares a lot of visual similarities with Kirby's Dream Course. What with that checkerboard pattern, similar enemies, and the levels are both shaped like bowls. But there is a big difference between the two. This Nintendo 64 tech demo is not a golf game. Instead, your goal was to knock a bunch of balls out of a bowl. And if you get them all out, you win. At least those were the rules when playing single player. The demo allowed you to play with up to 4 players simultaneously, and that's the main reason why it was shown at Shoshinkai. Since Mario 64 is only single player, Yamauchi wanted a demo there that showed off the Nintendo 64's 4-player capabilities. Now, in Kirby Bowl 64's multiplayer mode, your mission is now to knock your opponents out of the bowl as many times as you can within the time limit. Every time a player gets knocked out, 1 point is added to their score, so the player with the least amount of points wins. It was a pretty simple demo, and the controls were super simple too. The stick moves Kirby, and the B button makes him jump. To add a little spice to this, you could also collect power-ups, like the one that makes your Kirby way bigger than everyone else's, which makes knocking them out of the bowl that much easier. My guess is that the Maxim tomato is what would have given you this advantage. It seems to appear randomly throughout the game and will slowly drop to the floor for a player to grab. Oh, and did I mention that the bowl you're playing in has smoothly undulating protrusions that change the bowl's shape on the fly? It's true. In fact, that's an exact quote from GamePro magazine. See? Smoothly undulating protrusion.
But Andrew, this isn't anything like Kirby Air Ride. This has nothing to do with Kirby riding a vehicle on a racetrack. Well, that's because I've only shown you one of 2 modes in Kirby Bowl 64. There's still another side to this demo that we haven't seen just yet.
So Kirby Bowl 64 had 2 entirely different modes. The Bowl mode was for showing off the multiplayer capabilities of the Nintendo 64, and the second mode, well, that was only single player. But it makes up for that by being epic and radical, because it's all about snowboarding and doing sick tricks. Your goal is to race as quickly as possible to the end of the course, while collecting stars along the way. You're gonna need to jump, duck, bob, and weave in order to dodge obstacles like trees and arches. You weren't always on a snowboard though. Different rounds featured different gameplay styles. Sometimes you were on a board, other times you were just rolling to the end of the course. And the checkerboard pattern would also change color on different rounds too. Sometimes blue, sometimes black. And that was it for the demo. A lot of news outlets claimed that Kirby Bowl 64 was 20% complete at the time.
They got that information from the signs placed next to the demos. You can see here that Mario 64 was considered 50% done. But even so, no one who attended the show actually knew if Kirby 64 would ever get a full release.
And guess what? It did not. Kirby Bowl 64 was never seen after the show. It wasn't until many years later that we could play something even remotely similar to Bowl mode in Kirby Dream Buffet, which was released for the Switch in 2022. You might remember that one of the rounds is called Battle Royale, and your goal is to collect strawberries while knocking players off the stage. But even though HAL Laboratory waited decades before making something similar to Bowl mode, the race mode in Kirby Bowl 64 held on. Though this tech demo never saw the light of day, the next year at E3 1996, we got to see an upgraded version of this idea with a game called Kirby's Air Ride.
Now I want to make sure to make this clear. I didn't say Kirby Air Ride, I said Kirby's Air Ride. Those are 2 totally different games. Kirby Air Ride was released on the Nintendo GameCube, and Kirby's Air Ride was revealed for the Nintendo 64 at E3 1996, complete with this amazing logo.
Isn't that just so cute? This was the logo that was shown at E3. The game itself was being developed again by HAL Laboratory, which at the time was headed by Iwata. He was heavily involved in the development of Kirby's Air Ride, and it was definitely a lot more complex than race mode in Kirby Bowl 64. But unlike Kirby Bowl 64, this time there was no playable demo. If you were at E3 1996, all you would be able to see is a bit of gameplay footage playing on a giant screen at Nintendo's booth. So how about we take a look at all that footage, plus some screenshots that were given to the press during E3. But it's funny though, barely any of the press reported on Kirby's Air Ride, at least in the United States. But you can't really blame them. There was only around 20 seconds of footage shown of the game, and a lot of it didn't even have Kirby in it. Instead, it was King DDD who was the star at Nintendo's booth, shown riding down a hill towards the goal. And that's pretty much it for what was shown at the booth. Immediately after E3 1996, there was a lot more to learn about this elusive new game. A good chunk of the info comes from a catalog that Nintendo gave out around the same month as E3, called Nintendo New 1996 Products. Here's the screenshot that came with that booklet. And if we compare it to Kirby Bowl 64's race mode, they look very similar, with that checkered course that Kirby rides down, but instead of a snowboard, now he's riding a Warp Star. Well, actually the catalog calls it an airboard. The catalog actually says a lot about the game. Let's read it for a second. Kirby and his crew are the stars of this one-of-a-kind new racing/sports title brought to life with incredible speed and graphics by the Nintendo 64. Players ride airboards over courses that test their skills with moguls, hills, steep climbs, and bottomless drops. The game's courses come in championship, time trial, practice, and freestyle modes. The system will even generate random courses so players can have a new experience every time. Very cool stuff, especially that blurb on randomly generated courses. But what exactly did it mean by Kirby and his crew? We know that King DDD was playable, we saw that at the show, but it turns out there were two other playable characters too, Mr. Frosty and Poppy Bros Sr. Mr. Frosty is only visible in these screenshots, but we do have footage of Poppy Bros Sr. for like 1 second if even. He makes an appearance in the E3 1996 takeaway VHS tape that Nintendo gave to employees and retailers. And on that same VHS tape, we have footage of Kirby and King DDD racing, both by themselves and in split-screen multiplayer. Even though Kirby Bowl 64's race mode was only single player, in Kirby's Air Ride you could play with up to 4 players at once, and you could all be Pink Kirby if you wanted to be. And there's a lot more in this screenshot that we haven't seen yet. What do those gradient rings do? Is that a house? Cupcake? I can't tell. The resolution is just way too low. Seems like we're gonna have some questions left unanswered.
Or at least they were unanswered. That is until we got a look at another tape that was given out by Nintendo at E3 1996. We're not talking about the VHS tape that we saw earlier. Instead, we're gonna look at the aptly titled Nintendo N64 B-roll Betacam video cassette, which was made 2 days before E3 and given out to media outlets by Golan Harris Communications. This cassette contains over 13 minutes of B-roll for various Nintendo 64 games that were shown at E3 1996. And for Kirby's Air Ride, it's roughly 40 seconds of all new, uncut gameplay footage. So get on board, let's take a look at it.
From what I've seen, this looks to be footage of an entire race from beginning to end, seeing as it starts right before these flags, which likely indicates the start of the race, and then the footage ends after passing the goal ring. And the quality is just absolutely superb. You can see a bunch of trees, houses, and small gradient rings that appear throughout the race. And thanks to this footage being completely uncut, we can finally get a true feel for what this demo was all about, which is that it's completely broken. It's no wonder there wasn't a demo at E3, it's barely even a game at this point. Remember I said earlier that the races are randomly generated? Well, it's clear in this build that it's a bit too random. Right at the beginning, there's a ring that spawned in front of a building, so you can't go through it. And here's a ring that spawned just in a fence. Not to mention trying to squeeze through the rings is an absolute pain. If you're off by even a little bit, it's gonna stop you right in your tracks. Did I mention that going through the rings does absolutely nothing? But Andrew, just because the rings don't do anything and you can't go through half of them, doesn't mean that the game is completely broken. Well, I saved the best for last. As you can see in the footage, the goal ring, your one single goal in this game, can accidentally spawn on the other side of the fence, meaning that the player cannot finish the race and just ends up barreling off the edge of the world. But it's not all doom and gloom here. It does look pretty, and you can do some neat tricks off of jumps too. And this gives us a look at the bottom of the airboard, which has Kirby's name written on it. Very cute.
Half a year later, it was once again time for Shoshinkai. This one took place in November of 1996, and yes, Kirby's Air Ride was back in action. This time with a brand new build of the game. Very exciting. But unfortunately, just like at E3, we did not get a demo at the show. The only place we got to see it was in the Shoshinkai Space World showreel. And not to hype it up too much, but get excited because this time, the game actually works.
Alright, first things first, Kirby is wearing a cute baseball cap. Amazing. Already things are looking way better. And fun fact, the cap looks almost exactly the same as Yo-Yo Kirby's hat, a copy ability that debuted in Kirby Superstar, released 8 months before Shoshinkai 1996. But this video isn't about Kirby Superstar, this is about Kirby's Air Ride, now with UI. And some very interesting UI at that. Check out that Kirby face. It actually changes expression depending on what happens on screen. We've got happy, really happy, sad, and scared. And I think I figured out what conditions make each show up. Maybe. For happy and really happy, I'm assuming they only appear if the player has more than 0 lives, since that's the only time I've ever seen them appear. What makes really happy appear, I am not entirely sure, since the only proof that it even existed is from this one screenshot. If there was footage of it, maybe I could tell what caused it, but unfortunately nothing surfaced as of yet. Thankfully, there is footage of sad and scared, but at first they just seem to change randomly. Like, what's the difference between this frame of footage with sad Kirby and this frame with scared Kirby? They look exactly the same, but I think I figured out what makes each of them appear. I think it's based on Kirby's speed. You'll notice that he only looks scared when he's going really fast, which explains his brief moment where the scared face triggers. He must be going just fast enough down the hill to make that appear. There's also this pinwheel icon that only shows up above Kirby's face when he's on an airboard. Oh, and yeah, I probably should have mentioned that this version of the game added the ability to get off your board, like when you crash hard into the ground. After sustaining those injuries, you can now jump and float around like normal Kirby. This is kind of like Kirby Air Ride for the GameCube, right? But in that game, you can't do any tricks and crash land, so instead getting off your vehicle can only happen if you choose to jump off it, or if your machine took too much damage. And speaking of damage, one might think that this bar in Kirby's Air Ride is a damage meter, but I'm not quite sure about that. I mean, it can go down, but I don't know how that happens. When Kirby crashes into the ground, the meter doesn't budge an inch. It's possible that maybe it was something else, like a boost meter, but it's all just speculation. And that's pretty much it for the UI, so let's check out the course itself. First, those rings with the weird collision from E3, they've been replaced with poles instead. They still don't look like they do anything, but they are much easier to go through this time. There are still multicolored gradient rings that appear in the air that you can just jump through for fun, but these are 2D images, not 3D models, and thankfully, they don't have collision. Ooh, and we've got stars again. You'll notice that collectible stars were completely absent from the E3 1996 build of the game, but they have now made a triumphant return. In fact, the last time we saw them was all the way back in Kirby Bowl 64 as little collectibles. And since we're talking about collectibles, I want to show you this strange looking Saturn object that's completely see-through in the Shoshinkai footage. It looks as if it's a collectible that was already grabbed, like how in Mario 64, the stars that you already collected are just there see-through. But honestly, I have no proof that this was a collectible, because when Kirby runs into it, nothing happens. It looks like for now, this question will remain unanswered, and for real this time.
And that was pretty much it. Forever. Kirby's Air Ride was technically shown at E3 1997, but just as like a logo on a wall. There was no demo, no screenshots, no gameplay footage. Nintendo did show off Kirby Dream Land 3 and Kirby Superstar Stacker, But there was no Kirby's Air Ride. I mean, it wasn't like Nintendo teased it and then pulled out last minute. The official Nintendo Power E3 preview didn't mention the game at all. So where did it go? Kirby's Air Ride has been at every single E3 and Shoshinkai since late 1995, and now it's reduced to just a logo on a wall.
People weren't exactly up in arms about this, but it did generate some confusion. After all, Nintendo's official website still listed it as an upcoming game in development as of June 1997. So everyone was still expecting it to release on the Nintendo 64 eventually. But behind the scenes, things were not going well for Kirby's Air Ride. I'm not exactly sure why, but things just weren't coming together. They decided it was time to cancel Kirby's Air Ride. This was around September of 1997, and there was no official announcement that development was completely halted, and everyone who was working on the game just moved to different projects. Some were sent to work on Super Smash Bros., and others got to develop a new, more traditional Kirby game, Kirby 64. And as we went into 1998 with no news on Kirby's Air Ride, people just assumed that it was being worked on in secret, which is not right, or that it had been canceled, which was right. In an interview with GamePro magazine in March of 1998, Miyamoto was asked directly what happened to Air Ride. Now, Miyamoto is a very careful guy. He didn't want to say outright that the dream was dead and that the game was canceled. Instead, he stated that Nintendo didn't have any plans to release Kirby's Air Ride at this point in time, with Nintendo focusing instead on developing and publishing a different but similar game, 1080 Snowboarding. Now, of course, HAL Laboratory had nothing to do with 1080 Snowboarding. Kirby's Air Ride wasn't even an inspiration behind the game. The idea came from Miyamoto's love for skiing. It was just a nice coincidence that the two games were so similar. And Miyamoto used that opportunity to let fans down easy by letting them know that this new 1080 snowboarding game could more or less fill the void left by Kirby's Air Ride. But all that being said, Miyamoto did give us some insight into why Kirby's Air Ride was canceled. The people responsible for making the game complained that they didn't want to make a game where Kirby just slid around. It was just too basic of a concept, and that seems to have been the demise of Kirby's Air Ride.
And now we arrive at 1999. At E3 that year, there was still no Kirby's Air Ride. Instead, we got a reveal for an entirely different Kirby game, Kirby 64. During that time, Nintendo had an online webpage listing upcoming games. And with that reveal, Kirby's Air Ride was now officially replaced with Kirby 64. A sad day for Air Ride fans everywhere. But if for some reason you held out hope that maybe, just maybe, Kirby's Air Ride could be released one day, well, your Kirby dream was about to become a Kirby nightmare.
In August of 2000, months after the release of Kirby 64, Shigesato Itoi, Miyamoto, and Iwata sat down for an interview. It was a sad interview, all about the cancellation of Mother 3, also known as Earthbound 64. They spent most of the interview discussing what went wrong with Mother 3, but a few pages in, surprisingly, Iwata mentions Kirby's Air Ride, which, as I said before, he was heavily involved in the development of. Now, this is a great time for me to say that some news outlets at the time mistranslated this game's name in the interview as Kirby's Air Land. But no, this game was never called that. And it wasn't called Kirby's Air Race either. It was always Kirby's Air Ride. Anyway, Iwata lamented in this interview about how his spotless history of finished products was destroyed, all because of the failure of Kirby's Air Ride. Even though he tried all he could to get it across the finish line, it just was not happening. This is what gamers everywhere were dreading. Undeniable confirmation that Kirby's Air Ride was completely canceled, with no one working on the project as of August of 2000. But even though the game was scrapped, the name kinda stuck around. When HAL Laboratory released Super Smash Bros. Melee in Japan on November 21st, 2001, players noticed that one of the event matches was called Kirby's Air Ride, and it featured a bunch of Kirbys with a ton of Warp Stars to ride. It seems that this wasn't the end of Kirby's racing adventure, at least not yet. And that was all thanks to the Kirby anime.
I'm sure you all know about the Kirby anime, called Kirby Right Back At Ya in North America. But this isn't about the 4Kids version, we're going to be talking about the show's run in Japan. Hoshin Okabe started airing in October of 2001, which was very close to the release of Super Smash Bros. Melee. Both of these projects involved the legendary Masahiro Sakurai. Because he was the creator of both Kirby and Super Smash Bros., not only was he overseeing the new Kirby anime, but at the exact same time he was serving as the director of Melee. It was a busy time for both him and the company he worked for, HAL Laboratory. But it was about to get even busier.
So they've got this brand new Kirby anime, right? But you know what? We should probably release a new Kirby game too to capitalize on all the buzz. So who have we got working on a new Kirby game, huh? Oh, literally no one? Well, that's not good. The anime already started airing. We're gonna need to release something really quick. Okay, so let's have us, HAL Laboratory, quickly port Kirby's Adventure from the NES to the Game Boy Advance. We'll call that game Nightmare in Dreamland and start development on it like now. Then we can also bring in Flagship to work on a new game called Kirby and the Amazing Mirror, and that'll also be for the Game Boy Advance. But wait, we need something for the GameCube too. Ooh, that's where things are gonna get a bit tricky. See, HAL Laboratory had started developing a traditional Kirby game for the GameCube in 2000, right after Kirby 64 was completed. But even though it was planned to release in 2003 before the anime concluded, things got unexpectedly difficult. Kirby for the GameCube was supposed to be both a single-player and four-person multiplayer game, and they just did not have the experience to pull that off quick enough. There was no way it was going to be released in time. In fact, they had paused development of the game by the time the anime started so they could focus on other projects instead. But Nintendo was also working on a game called Kirby Tilt and Tumble 2 for the GameCube, which ended up getting revealed at Space World 2001. But that game would have required the player to not only own a GameCube, but also a Game Boy Advance. Not the most ideal, but hey, it is a Kirby game for the GameCube. Oh wait, it's not? Oh, the Kirby branding ended up getting completely removed, and the game was reintroduced as Roll-O-Rama at E3 2002 before it got completely canceled. Dang, all these Kirby GameCube games just aren't working out. They either end up being too ambitious or too out-of-the-box weird. Sakurai, we need your help. We need a new idea for a Kirby GameCube game now. Well, Sakurai knew that if they wanted to release a game before the Kirby anime concluded, it was going to need to be way simpler to develop. So instead of an action platformer like normal, he submitted a proposal for a racing game called Kirby Air Ride.
Now, it's important to note that even though Kirby's Air Ride for the Nintendo 64 and Kirby Air Ride for the GameCube share similar names, these are entirely different games. Not only do they play differently, but Sakurai went on record saying that the GameCube game was barely influenced by the Nintendo 64 one. And he would know he was heavily involved in the development of Kirby Air Ride for the GameCube. But it wasn't by choice, it was necessity. If he hadn't gotten involved, it may have very well been canceled, just like the rest of the Kirby GameCube games.
As I said before, Sakurai was a very busy man at the time, trying to juggle so many different roles at HAL Laboratory. As the chief director of the Kirby series, he had to be at least somewhat involved in all these new games, but he tried his best to only act as a supervisor and let the developers develop the game as they see fit. But Kirby Air Ride was his idea, so he ended up being much more involved in that game compared to the Game Boy Advance ones that were being made. The graphics and sound he wanted to pay particular attention to, giving lots of feedback just to make sure the game hit that Kirby look and feel perfectly. But that being said, he was still going to do his best to leave the developing to the developers. That was until he was called in by lead programmer of Kirby Air Ride, Koichi Watanabe. He wanted to let Sakurai know that the game was completely unplayable and that they needed help. Major help. After a year of development on Kirby Air Ride, despite things looking and sounding very nice, you could not play it. The very important racing portion was completely broken. None of the machines worked correctly, and that is a major problem. If they were going to get this game done in time before the end of the anime, Sakurai needed to do something that he hadn't done since Kirby Superstar. He was going to become the director of a Kirby game. But if Sakurai was going to become the full-blown director of Kirby Air Ride, he was going to make it his way. So what is his way? Well, in an interview that took place in March of 2000, Sakurai was asked directly what he would do if he ever spearheaded another Kirby game. He specifically said that he wanted to utilize a control stick instead of a D-pad, and also mentioned that he had a fascination with making a Kirby game required the player to press as few buttons as possible. And now that he was director of Kirby Air Ride, he was going to fulfill that vision. And if you've played the game, then you know he did just that, requiring only the A button and control stick to play. But of course, before he could bring this vision into reality, he and his team needed to get the game to actually work. First order of business, it was time to start over. They were going to rebuild Kirby Air Ride from scratch. A tough ask for the team. Watching a year of your work being completely thrown out is not easy, but it had to be done. Even though the team was exhausted having to start everything over all over again, it was worth it. They managed to finally get things working and playable, and it only took 3.5 months to do it. Of course, that was only really possible because they already had the courses and machines completely modeled and animated at that point. And now with Kirby Air Ride in a playable form, it was time to finally show it to the world.
Now, when I said that they were going to show it off to the world, I actually didn't mean the entire world. I actually meant a tiny, small, minuscule group of people at a private viewing at DICE Summit 2003.
So what is a DICE Summit? Well, basically, it's an annual gathering of video game developers, executives, and maybe even some of the press, where they all sit together, network, and listen to conversation and keynotes about video games and the gaming industry. DICE Summit 2003 is the one that we'll be looking at, and it took place on February 27th and 28th. On the first day of the summit, there was a panel called An Audience with the Masters, which featured Miyamoto from Nintendo and Yu Suzuki from Sega. That's where Kirby Air Ride was first shown. Or at least that's where it was most likely shown. We know it was definitely revealed at DICE Summit 2003, but we don't have any footage to absolutely confirm that Air Ride was shown at that specific panel. But it's technically still possible we could find that footage because the panel had an official recording made and distributed. We just need to find a copy of the DICE Summit 2003 DVD. Simple, right? Well, probably not. I doubt there were many people who actually bought the DVD since it was sold for $450 to non-Academy members back in 2003. It's okay though. The footage they showed off of Kirby Air Ride only lasted a few seconds at most. And thanks to Planet GameCube, we still have a brief description of what was in those few seconds. They described the footage as a mixture of Mario Kart and standard Kirby fare, with Kirby sucking up enemy powers on the fly, booster arrows, and shortcuts. But if a written description isn't enough, how about a couple screenshots? The first one shows off Beanstalk Park, and the first thing I'm noticing is that Pink Kirby is the only racer on the course, because this early position graphic says he's first out of 1. They ended up dropping the out of part in the final game. The early UI also shows that the player is on lap 1 of 6, potentially even more. This list of blank times is different from how the final game does it. There it shows you your last 3 lap times, but only after the lap is completed. Plus it has it on the bottom left instead of right under the position. The bottom left of this early screenshot has something different instead. A compass. At least that's what I think it is based on the look. But what on earth would you need a compass for? Well, I guess the developers felt the same because it was removed from the final game. On the other corner, we've got the minimap, which is very different from the final game, with this early version being in 3D and the final version being 2D. This was likely done because it makes things easier to see. I mean, look at this mess of blue lines here. There's no way you'd be able to tell what's going on. And since I'm already on this side of the screen, I should mention that the lap counter underneath is missing the label lap. And that's about it for the screenshot. The next one comes from Nintendo Power issue 167, where they refer to the game as Kirby's Air Ride, which is a direct translation of the final Japanese name. It doesn't have nearly as much to look at without the early UI, but it does show what power-up was featured in the DICE Summit footage, Sword. It appears to be slightly different color, with the signature jewel being missing from it, or maybe Kirby's hand is just covering it. The final game has Kirby gripping the sword far lower than this early build, that way you can't miss the sword's absolutely stunning centerpiece.
Because Kirby Air Ride was shown at a private viewing, there wasn't anything other than those couple screenshots to excite the general public. Heck, even the people who were there and got to see the footage at DICE Summit 2003 were not that excited. And for some reason, IGN just absolutely hated the game. They said, and I quote, "Certainly one of the stranger, more baffling games we've seen in a good while. We're frankly not overflowing with anticipation to play it, so hopefully Kirby's Air Ride is not representative of Nintendo's E3 2003 lineup. It was enough to certainly leave a mark and possibly even scar us for life."
But even if IGN didn't care about the footage they saw, the other members of the press did. The day after Miyamoto's panel, he and Aonuma sat down to a roundtable discussion to answer any questions the press had for 45 minutes. And we even have a photo of it too. Looks kind of like they're just in some guy's hotel room. Well, anyway, when asked about Kirby Air Ride, all he said was that HAL Laboratory was developing it with no actual info on the game itself. Now, for more info, we would have to wait until E3 2003, but it was only like 3 months away. We could wait. The question is, how much footage are we gonna get? A few seconds? A minute? Well, how about 5 times that much? That's right, E3 2003 was the big reveal of Kirby Air Ride, featuring footage from multiple unique trailers, along with an actual playable demo. Now, I've taken a good hard look at this demo, and everything I've seen of it, it looks exactly the same as the final game. But the trailers, that's a different story. They all take footage from various early builds of the game, and you could watch them on the show floor at the new title's video-only TVs scattered around Nintendo's booth. So let's go take a look at them and compare each to the final game. There are 3 distinct trailers from E3 2003, and the first is all about racing, the various copy abilities you can get, and it even shows off 4-player split-screen races. Let's start by looking at the courses we can see in the trailer: Fantasy Meadows, Beanstalk Park, and Checker Nights. Oh, and we've already got a noticeable change in Fantasy Meadow. It's the banner at the beginning. Here it says START, written on it in big bold letters, but for some reason this was removed from the final game, replaced with vines growing all over the banner instead of the friendly start text. But that's not all that changed. Check out all these missing background elements that were added later on. The flowers and tall grass really add something to the background. Glad they added that. Next is Beanstalk Park, which doesn't have any obvious changes. Not like Checker Nights. Now there's a course we should check out. Starting with the boost pads, which you can see changed quite a bit, getting a much more futuristic look in the final game. And we've also got this different left turn sign, which used to be way easier to see with that yellow color, compared to the green sign in the final game that blends into the background. Oh, and check out when Kirby uses his sword copy ability on these enemies. Not only are the enemies missing shadows underneath them in this early trailer, but when you defeat them, they get blasted off the course straight to the sky. Though the final game decided to do a bit differently by adding some physics, so that way defeated enemies will bounce around the environment. Now, speaking of copy abilities, let's take a look at how some of them differ in this trailer. First off, the sword, which still looks like the Nintendo Power screenshot that we saw earlier, with no jewel to be seen, at least not on the model. The graphic that appears on the UI does have the jewel, but it's a different color. In fact, the whole thing sports different colors compared to the final version. Next up is the mic, and when Kirby uses it, you'll notice that it's missing the particle effect that has all the sparkles with it. Not super different, just cosmetic changes, but I saved the most interesting copy ability for last, Plasma. The Plasma ability does have cosmetic changes, at least when it comes to the icon, but it's not just that. From what I've seen, the whole ability looks to have functioned completely different in this trailer. Instead of filling up the meter by spinning the control stick, gaining more power as the meter goes up, in this early build of the game, the meter just completely goes full right off the bat. When the player presses A to shoot, the entire meter depletes, and the plasma that Kirby shoots out, that does not exist in the final game, and unfortunately, that's all we get to see of this early copy ability. So the question remains, did you have to charge it again after that first shot? Or was that it? And are there different kinds of shots in this early version, or is it just that one single bolt? I have no idea. And the worst part is, even though this copy ability is shown in all 3 trailers, the footage always cuts after the first shot, and we can never see what happens next.
Now it's time that we check out the second E3 trailer for Kirby Air Ride, and this one shows off even more courses than the first trailer. In addition to the 3 we've already seen, we've also got our first look at Frozen Hillside, Sky Sands, and Magma Flows. This was also the first time that we caught a glimpse at both Top Ride and City Trial as well, which both have a few changes that we should definitely take a look at.
First, I want you to know that this trailer includes footage from a later point in development compared to the first one, but it's still not quite like the final game. For example, that section in Checker Nights where it shows the early left sign, they re-recorded that for some reason. And while it does still use the yellow sign, the boost pads are now just like the final game. Because this build is from later in development, there aren't really any new interesting changes to Air Ride's races. So let's check out Top Ride, which isn't using the unique countdown like the final game does. Instead, this early trailer is just reusing the countdown from normal races. And also, being the font expert that I am, I immediately noticed that the player numbers use a different font. It also says 1P instead of P1, but that's not actually a change, that's just how it's written in the final Japanese version. Speaking of which, comparing this early version of the lap counter to the final game released in Japan, you notice it was a lot less colorful back then. But let's be real here. What we all really want to see in this trailer is an early version of City Trial, and here it is. Let's go through some of the changes here, but I'll be honest, it's all really subtle. First, there's no copyability generator between these two buildings. That ended up being added in later. This building over here changed color, along with a lot of pink stone around it. Oh, and those rings, those are missing from this early build. There's not much more than that in this trailer, other than the light brown hill in the final looking like a more brownish dull green color. As I said, very subtle. So let's see what awaits City Trial in the third and last trailer from E3 2003. Right away we can see that all of these coral trees were just one little rock originally. And for a nice big change, we can check out this very early volcano, which isn't nearly as angry as the final game. It actually looks pretty chill, with no lava dragons to worry about either. But City Trial is more than just the city, it's also the stadium events that come after, and we get to see our first look of them here, specifically Drag Race 2, High Jump, and Kirby Melee 1. Combining all these together, there are two noticeable differences we can find. First, the boost gates from the final version of Drag Race 2 were originally using the boost pads from Checker Knights. And then there's Kirby Melee 1, which has some weird UI stuff going on. Your position is shown on the top left to say that you're in first, even though it's not a race. And the lap counter and timers are on screen too, even though it's not a race. I don't think it was intended to be like this though. It was probably just a side effect of using some sort of debug menu. So why don't we look at some actual changes then? To do that, it's back to the races, because we can see some new angles to tracks that we've already looked at, like Fantasy Meadows, where this beautiful flower from the beginning of the race was moved over in front of the waterfall, and a cute fence and clovers took its place. Heading to Checker Knights, you'll notice that this early version has the arrows much further away from the tube compared to the final game. And lastly, we can see some changes in Frozen Hillside right at this section with the lasers. Here you'll notice that the arrows on the wall were moved down in the final game, probably to make them easier to see, and the floor is definitely not purple here, but I honestly don't know what color it is, because it's just so blown out. Thankfully, the overexposed colors didn't ruin our look at this early logo for Kirby Air Ride, which looks almost exactly the same as the logo for Kirby Nightmare in Dreamland, which itself borrows its background from the 4Kids anime logo for Kirby Right Back At Ya. And that is it for all the trailers. But in typical fashion, Nintendo Power just got a bit extra. In their E3 2003 issue, they showed off an exclusive screenshot of City Trial that lets us see an early icon for the charge patch. Plus, there's the minimap, which is a bit different, but at the same time looks to have the same general layout. Honestly, that's kind of how we can describe all of these E3 changes. A bit different, but the game at this point was still fundamentally the same as the final game.
And with that, we've now covered everything from E3 2003 that I wanted to look at. And thankfully, from this point forward, things went nice and smooth all the way to release, which in Japan was on July 11th, 2003, just a couple months before the end of the Kirby anime. They made it. And because they made it, the Kirby anime was able to do a crossover with the game, airing a couple episodes that featured characters riding machines from Air Ride just a month or so after the launch of the game.
To celebrate the release of Kirby Air Ride, Sakurai decided to quit his job. Yeah, a few weeks after the game launch, he resigned from HAL Laboratory. He said at the time that he didn't like the structure of working full-time at a typical game development company, instead wanting a career with a bit more freedom. Not to mention the constant pressure of having to make sequels to existing games was tiring him out, so he decided to go freelance. After his work as the special advisor for Kirby and the Amazing Mirror, he never worked on a mainline Kirby game ever again. Or so we thought. Out of nowhere, during the April 2nd, 2025 Nintendo Direct, it was announced that Kirby Air Ride was getting a sequel for the Switch 2 called Kirby Air Riders. And the biggest news of all, it was once again directed by the one, the only, Masahiro Sakurai.
Alright, we made it to unused stuff in Kirby Air Ride, but before we talk about all of this, I've got to explain the debug mode first. Some have said that this is the most intricate debug mode of any video game ever released ever. Now, I wouldn't go that far, but it is expansive to say the least. You can enable the menu with an action replay code, and when the code is active, it'll show you the build date and time on the top left of the screen. That's how we know that this Japanese version of the game was finalized on June 26th, 2003 at 1:01 in the morning. Pressing X on the title screen will give us access to that famous debug mode, which includes something I have never seen go unused before in any video game I've covered on this channel. An incredibly detailed development log spanning roughly 8 months of the game's development. So, let's take a look at it.
Obviously, there's a lot to look at here, and it's all in Japanese, so allow me to translate for you some of the most interesting pieces of info in this devlog. First things first, let's scroll all the way to the bottom and see the first change that was logged. It looks like it was on September 3rd, 2002, and written by Seiji Otoguro. This wasn't when Kirby Air Ride actually started development, just when the logs began being kept. This entry translates to say this: added weak enemies Flappy and Plasma Wisp, test of weak enemies riding temporary vehicles. Having weak enemies riding vehicles is an interesting addition. The only similar thing I can think of in the final game is with Sword Knight, which rides a hoverboard. But it's not referring to that, since there's a separate log entry that says that the Sword Knight started riding a vehicle on September 12th, 2002, the same day that Gordo was added to the game. Waddle Dees also ride their cute little carts in Air Ride, but that's not what it was talking about either, because this cute feature was added in much later on March 14th, 2003. Honestly, I can't tell if this test of enemies riding vehicles ended up getting scrapped. Same goes for an enemy that was added on March 22nd called Seesaw. For the life of me, I cannot figure out what this enemy could be referring to. Maybe it was just a nickname they had for some weak enemy in the game, or maybe it was removed later on. But I will tell you this, there are plenty of things in this devlog that I know were scrapped. Seems to me that roughly 100 courses listed here were completely removed from the final game, and potentially even more. For starters, there used to be 3 city test courses that were obviously made for testing City Trial. The first test course was added on October 25th alongside Sky 2, which is the internal name for Beanstalk Park. Seems there was also a course called Sky 1 that was added a couple months before on September 3rd, but that one ended up being removed alongside all 3 city tests. There were also courses labeled Test 15 through 20 added in on Christmas Eve 2002, the same day that Beanstalk Park got its giant Ferris wheel. But while the wheel stayed the same in the final game, the tests were removed. For the next scrap course, I want to first let you know that the internal name for Sky Sands is Desert 1, which would make you think that it's the first iteration of the course, but that's not the case. There was also one just called Desert that was removed from the game on October 8th, alongside every take map that wasn't Take 9, plus an additional 70 rough courses were cut too. Before being deleted though, parts of Rough 44 were added to Plants 1, which is the internal name for Fantasy Meadows. All the other removed courses that I want to talk about happen to be stadiums that were planned to be included, but for some reason didn't make it in. Flick 3 was another casualty, known also as Flick Royal. Absolutely no idea what this was supposed to be, but apparently this was the 3rd one and was added in on December 17th. Then there was the removed Jump 4 course. The final game has Jump 1, which is High Jump, Jump 2, known as Target Flight, and Jump 3, which is Air Glider, but there is no Jump 4. Air Glider and Jump 4 were added on the same day, January 30th. Alongside another scrap stadium, Chicken 1. Now, Chicken is very, very interesting to me personally. There were 2 of these, with Chicken 2 being added in on February 5th. Thing is, neither of them made it in the final game, but I found the intro text animation is still present in the files of Kirby Air Ride. So without further ado, here it is, Chicken Race. So what is it? Well, it turns out Chicken Race was first a sub-game in Kirby Tilt and Tumble, where your goal was to charge up your vehicle as much as possible to pass a chicken, but not too much so you don't fall off the cliff at the very end. So be very careful, Kirby. I'm assuming Chicken Race and Kirby Air Ride would have functioned the same way, and man, that would have been fun. But it was sadly scrapped sometime between February and June 2003. Now, we've been talking a lot about City Trial stadiums, but what about City Trial itself? Well, there are some interesting tidbits in the log here. For instance, there was work being done on City Trial all the way till the end of development, with the final log entry mentioning the addition of 3 events to the city: Item Bounce, What's in the Box, and Fake Items. But I would say the most interesting City Trial log was back on November 28, 2002, where it says that a cut-back City Trial map was tentatively added to the game. Now, I don't know what that means exactly, but I have some theories. It could refer to Destruction Derby 4 and 5, which in the final game use a smaller version of City Trial. But maybe there was a test map made of a smaller version of City Trial. But if that's the case, which did we get in our version? The full-size one or the smaller one? The world may never know.
And with that, we have made it to the end of the debug log. And now I'd like to take some time to look at the 6 test courses that are left over in the final version of Kirby Air Ride.
First, we'll take a look at the simplest one, Dummy. And here we go. First thing you'll notice is that there's literally nothing here. Well, I guess technically there is something. If you make collision regions visible, you can see that there's a very large plane on the top that Kirby is riding upside down. And once you reach the end of it, you'll rotate right side up and fall into the infinite void. Next is Test, which is an actual race course this time. It's simple, just an oval, but hey, at least it's visible, with a bunch of enemies running around and some strange objects scattered on the course. We've got yellow stars, purple stars, green triangles, purpley red droplet things, purple and blue triangle pairs, and to top it all off, there's a big reflective pipe at the end that you can drive through. None of it does anything, and honestly, I have no idea what it would have done if it had been working. Now, if you thought Test was good, get ready for Test 6. Now, we didn't skip Test 2 through 5, those aren't in the game anymore, but Test 6 is here for testing a couple things. First, terrain types, like grass, ice, and a few more. Now, you'd think that they'd make the hiragana on it describe what the terrain type is, but no, they just all say floor. The other thing Test 6 was made for testing was drag race style levels. This long sandy road is perfect for one of these, and it comes complete with an invisible finish line at the end. Now, you'll notice that the lap number appears on the screen, even though it shouldn't be, but that's because I have it set to the wrong rules in this recording. Here, I'll show you how to change it. The game automatically picks lap as the default option, but to make it work correctly, we should set it to 0yon, which is the Japanese name for the drag race mode. Oh, and by the way, there are some unused rule sets here that we can check out. A bunch actually, but unfortunately none of them are functional. There's Chicken and Flick Royal, which we talked about earlier, but there's some new ones here too, like DDD Royal, Just Goal, Single Time, Container, Coin, and Coin Battle. Most just set the timer to 008020 with no lap counter, placement, or map. That is except for Single Time, which sets the timer to 1 minute, but it just keeps looping the last second endlessly. Now, you know how we had that intro text animation for Chicken Race? Well, guess what? I found more unused animations for some of these unused rule sets too, like Just Goal, Coin Battle, and Container Break, with the last one actually getting mentioned in the devlog on April 30th, 2003. So it seems like Container Break was scrapped very late in development. Alright, back to those test courses. We just saw Test 6, and now it's time for Test 7. It's similar to Test 6 in that it's a completely straight line, but this time there are drops that get increasingly steeper as you go on. The skybox surrounding it is only used in this test course, and it looks pretty messed up at certain angles. And something really cool with this map is that it causes the drop warning to activate. And let me explain what that is. It's a warning that normally shows on screen when you get close to a kill plane, but you pretty much never see it in the final game because you can't be on a vehicle when it happens. The animation of Kirby falling off his vehicle will always play before the warning gets a chance to trigger, but there are 2 simple ways to see it in action, and the first you can try at home. Go to Destruction Derby 1 and have another player destroy your machine near the hole, so when you fall in, you don't have your machine. That means the cutscene doesn't play, and for a brief second, the warning shows. The second easy way is just to load up Test 7 and turn around. It starts playing immediately, and the closer you get to the edge, the faster the animation and the faster the warning sound effect plays. And it also shows at the very end of the course too. So this warning isn't unused, but based on how rarely it plays in normal gameplay, it might as well be.
Now there's only 2 more test maps to go. The first one is called Simple, and ironically, it is the most complex and biggest course in the entire game. In fact, it is so big that it requires a patch to run, because the model data in this course is the biggest file in the entire game if you don't count the videos. But why is it so big? Well, it's because the textures are uncompressed, and the GameCube simply cannot handle running it because of its limited amount of usable RAM. By converting the textures into a more reasonable format, like by using a patch from user container 12345, we are able to see what this test map is all about.
So first off, there's a lot of blocks here with labels on pretty much everything. We've got our classic floors, and now we've got the addition of walls and ceilings for all kinds of shapes and materials. There's also big walls called Ring Check H that causes you to speed up when flying through them. And we've got a super jump wall that does exactly what it says when you touch it. There's also a couple rails here too. The first one is green and was meant to test branching pathways where you could choose which direction you want to go. And the red one is just there to be annoying. It moves around really fast, and if you so much as breathe next to it, you are locked in and forced to ride it. Now what else is around here? Well, there's these light poles that change Kirby's color and shading when close by, and then there's the death box. And if you touch it, Kirby is done for. But the weird thing is, one time when I touched it, I won the test map. I've never been able to make it do that again, so I'm glad that I have this proof that I am, indeed, a winner. But before we move on, there is one last thing here that I want to show you. This wall and floor combo was here to test stadiums like high jump, air glider, and target flight, where the goal is to measure your distance or hit the wall tile with the most points. Here in the simple map, when you land on the wall or floor, your vehicle comes to a complete stop and you cannot move anymore. And it also plays one of the grossest sound effects you'll ever hear in a Kirby game. If you have your rules set correctly, like to high jump, it will show your score and then end the course. But if you don't have it set correctly, Kirby's vehicle will be staying here permanently. Now, Kirby can technically jump off his vehicle, but the game does not like it, and it causes Kirby's animations to freeze. But you can still move around, so that's a plus. And last but not least, we have our final test course, Simple 2, which according to the devlog was added to the game on September 6, 2002, along with Check 2, also known as Checker Nights. Simple 2 is actually simpler than Simple, with far less to do here. There's some destructibles hanging around, multiple moving panels that'll move you in different ways, more ramps of various terrain types, a box that gives you a boost, as well as a ton of sound effect panels, ranging from to, and also, but it's not just sound effects. Some panels actually do things, like this deer one launches the player up, the UFO catcher grabs the player and moves them to the other panel, and there's a cannon here that launches the player much like in Machine Passage. In fact, according to the devlog, this cannon was added to both Machine Passage and Simple 2 on the same day, December 26th. There's also a place over here to test out the lasers, and if you get hurt, no worries. Just head on over to the healing pad, they'll take care of you. And with that, we've taken care of every test map in the game. But is that really everything that's gone unused?
Oh, that is definitely not it. In fact, these last unused findings are some of the most interesting leftovers in the game. We've got early unused graphics, items, and even a completely scrapped vehicle that you can still ride. So strap in, let's see what we got.
I think we should start with unused graphics, specifically an early version of this banner, which shows in the memory card menu of the GameCube. But what could a simple early banner show us that's so interesting? Well, here it is. It's got a cute Kirby. But most importantly, it's got a vehicle that doesn't look like anything in the final game. It's closest to the Warp Star, but it looks more like a plane. And how about this? An early result screen for Top Ride with a temporary stamp right on it.
This is a mock-up of what the result screen was planned to look like, and it looks nothing like the final game. All this data is completely gone with only the times remaining. Also, fun fact, it looks like Top Ride was originally called Air Ride 2D in this stage of development. In the final game, it's called Ue Raido, which is a play on words. Raido means ride, and instead of Ea for air, it's using the term Ue, which means above. It's a reference to the top-down camera that is always above the action. Speaking of Top Ride, there is a debug menu specifically for it known as Race 2D, and it gives us unprecedented access to all the ins and outs of the mode, including the ability to get an unused item to spawn known as Ushiro Yurerun, which could be translated to an unstable behind. I swear that'll make sense in a second when I show it to you in action, but we just need to disable all the items first, and I'm borrowing the parameters from another item just to make sure that it spawns. And here it is. Looks like a crystal or something. When you pick it up, it causes a disruption behind Kirby, like the atmosphere behind him is becoming unstable in some way. And it also plays this jarring, loud sound effect when you pick it up too. This is actually two sound effects playing on top of each other. The first one is Ushiro Yure, like the item is named. And the second one is interesting because it's called Mae Yure. Mae means in front of, so it looks like there may have been two separate items at some point that did the same thing, but one disrupted the front of the player and the other behind them. But I'm gonna be honest with you, I have no idea how this item was supposed to be useful. I guess it could cause some confusion to the other players. I mean, I'm certainly confused. I can see why it was scrapped. Now let's back out of Race 2D and head to Race 3D one last time. But it's not to play a specific course. No, it's to play with a specific vehicle, wheel_normal. Looking at the model here, it certainly looks like a normal wheel, but riding it is anything but normal. Because when Kirby gets on and starts moving, he rotates with the tire, which I guess makes sense since there's no seat on the wheel. In the game, it just acts like a normal bike-type machine, but when you get hit, you are knocked so incredibly far back that you get stuck in the ceiling for a while until the game decides that it's time for you to come back down. Doing this in City Trial is really fun to watch, since the ceiling collision plane is so high up. You really get to see everything from up here. A beautiful, breathtaking view of a truly beautiful game. As you can tell, the development of Kirby Air Ride is truly a rabbit hole, with twists and turns that I did not expect when we started making this video. I didn't even know about Dice Summit until I learned that Air Ride was shown there. And did you know that on November 20th, 2002, programmer Tsuruoka added a rail to the game? Just a rail? Why do I know that? The fact that we have such a detailed developer log left over in the game, it is just completely unprecedented. But what would a good race be without some unexpected results? I am incredibly fond of this game, and I hope you enjoyed this look at Kirby Air Ride. Thank you so much for watching. If you're interested in supporting Beta64 to help keep these videos coming, check out the Patreon. It is the best way you can support the show. Not only do you get new content every week, including an exclusive behind-the-scenes look at the making of this video, but you can also get your name on the end card next to these lovely producers. The link to the Patreon is in the description. See you there.